Hello, assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another edition of Zoom In on the Halal Metropolis. And this afternoon, we're talking to Mark Crain. He's the executive director of Dream of Detroit. Hey, Mark, assalamu alaikum. How are you doing?
Walaikum Salam. Good, alhamdulillah. How are you doing?
Good, good. I know you had probably a big year planned for Dream of Detroit. Lots of projects, a lot of
We
community
always
projects.
have big years planned, you know what I
This is
mean?
true, yeah. And I know it's all been really disrupted. I want to get into that in just a second, but before we get into that, just want to check in on you and how are you doing? How's your family holding up?
Alhamdulillah, everybody is doing well. We're staying well isolated for the most part. I don't know if if the kids realize that they're not going to go back to school for the next 4 months yet. But we certainly realize it. Yeah, everybody's, no one's gone stir crazy yet. We're hanging in there together.
That's good. That's good. Hopefully the weather starts getting better too, so we can start
We
getting
had a
outside a
brief
little
moment, right? We had a brief
bit.
moment that was nice. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So tell me a little bit about like what were the plans for Dream this year?
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, to some degree, some of our core work, can't and doesn't stop, and so we're still rehabbing some homes. Even right now, we've got a couple under, that are under construction or under rehab. Of course, things have slowed a little bit. Crews have been a little bit depleted, but we're still trying to keep things moving on that front. The biggest difference, of course, is that the efforts that we typically put on to try to generate and build and sustain community are taking a hit. And so, we had hoped last year we did a really big iftar with Access and ABISA, the African Bureau for Immigration and Social Affairs, and the Muslim Anti-Racism Collective or Collaborative, and at the Muslim Center. And it was a really great event, that we won't be able to replicate this year now. We won't be able to do or haven't been able to do our monthly movie nights. We won't be able to do any big new volunteer engagement events this year. Typically in the spring, we would be having our big annual cleanup or tree planting or board up event or something like that. The biggest event that we had to make the difficult decision to cancel, unfortunately, is our annual street fair. So this would have been the fourth year that we would have held the street fair in August. And it just, it's for an event whose one of whom explicit goal is attendance and density. This unfortunately just isn't the year for it. So a lot of things have had to shift, but again, core work continues to go on.
Yeah, I mean that's incredible because that's out in August, and we're sort of now, I think, thinking about canceling things, in the summer and even looking at the fall, and so that's really disappointing. I think for a lot of organizations because so much of the planning happens now, and so in
Yeah,
order to get something on the books to make it run like a well-oiled machine, you really have to be working on it now. And certainly, we were looking forward to being participating in a lot of those things as well.
yeah.
So how are you guys adjusting?
Um, well, we're taking it a little bit day by day. I mean, I don't have a great answer to that. I'll say that there were weird things happening during this whole COVID thing for everyone, right? So some days folks, some days you're incredibly productive and other days you're just binge watching TV or something, right? Because we're all on this up and down thing together in our own ways. And so, and so to some extent we are making use of time that is not going to other places, and still having our monthly steering committee meetings and trying to apply for grants still, and trying to identify new leads for new residents. I mean, in some ways there's still stuff that's happening, but again, it's kind of a day by day. I would say the street fair in particular, that's our biggest, or at least for the past couple of years, outside of individual home rehabs, our biggest single cost event. And so not only is it months of planning, there's booking artists and there's recruiting vendors and the marketing. And so there's so much that has to happen now that if we were to wait until June or
Yeah.
July to actually cancel, it's the sunken costs are just incredible to an organization as small as us. And so it was a hard decision, but it was one we felt like we had to make early. We're hoping, of course, that August will roll around and there won't be restrictions. But even if there aren't, we're still expecting that people will be more hesitant to gather in large groups, right? The other piece is that, frankly, as soon as this whole thing started to happen, we reached out to one of the foundation funders for that event and said, "Hey, how are you all thinking about, public events this year because they've got a series of them nationally. And they said, oh, things are continuing as planned right now. And then 10 days later, they were telling all of their applicants, don't expect funding this year. So we're a
Yeah.
little bit ahead of the curve on our cancellation there.
Yeah, yeah. And I know that you guys serve some really vulnerable communities in the part of Detroit that you're in, along with the Muslim Center and the Huda Clinic. And so I haven't been to the community in a couple months, and so just what's going on and how are people adjusting at the mosque and through the food distribution and the food pantry? What's going on with all that?
Things are quiet. Things are really quiet. So the masjid has been closed. Um, the mosque has been closed entirely. Since the whole thing kicked off, we canceled Friday services immediately, and then regular salat right after that. We've continued to keep the doors open for the pantry and the soup kitchen. The soup kitchen hasn't closed in 30 years, and so folks were really reluctant to put the hold on that, especially in a moment of need like this. But we did greatly reduce the volunteer staff who work it, and have just generally tried to keep fewer folks in the building and not make ourselves any sort of source of spread, right? We've continued to run the pantry 1 to 2 days a week. It's fluctuated a little bit. We're actually looking at plans to expand it right now. Just took us a bit of time to sort of like ramp up toward that. But we are looking at plans to run more days per week as we get into May, God willing, in June. So the center's still there and active, and they've moved a lot of their programming online. Everything that they were typically doing for Ramadan in terms of daily halakha, daily lectures, and other programming, they're going to try to move online to the extent possible. The clinic is still open. Haven't been over there, frankly, since the whole thing started, but they're still open on their regular schedule and seeing patients. But beyond that, I mean, things are definitely not that we were ever the most highly trafficked neighborhood, but things are definitely quieter. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then, one of the big things that a lot of people are thinking about right now is Ramadan. With Ramadan coming up, it's going to be a very different type of Ramadan this year. So, what does that look like for Dream of Detroit? What does it look like for you and your family? How are you guys preparing?
Yeah. For Dream, I'm not actually sure what it's going to mean just yet. We may end up doing maybe one webinar. We may end up doing, I don't know if we'll end up launching a small crowdfunding campaign or not to help sustain some of our work. Certainly, we've taken, a donation hit during this period, like a lot of other small nonprofits, and so we're figuring out sort of how to close gaps there. But this is a particularly difficult time, in that regard. So. It's hard to say. I imagine that for Dream, because we can't do our big community events, it will just be like a regular day-to-day sort of thing, and we'll keep focusing on the houses and writing as much as we can to open up resources for the future. I think that's unfortunately kind of where it's going to be, end up being. It won't be the most communal Ramadan for Dream. We'll support some of the other activities that are happening, of course. The mosque is planning a bunch of different things to engage folks, from Fajr time, through Maghrib and into, after Isha. So all day long, where folks might be in the masjid, we're trying to provide, digital alternatives. And so Dream will, promote some of that stuff. We're also really tied into like our block club and we co-founded the block club in this neighborhood. The boundaries actually map onto our impact turf for Dream. And it's been a really helpful vehicle for us to build credibility with and engage more of the longtime local residents in this area. And so trying to further link the Muslim Center Pantry with the Block Club members, trying to make sure that the Michigan Muslim Grocery Delivery Service is accessible to folks in our impact turf, trying to make sure that that we're doing a virtual neighborhood check-in for folks to see their neighbors, since we can't see each other outside right now. So we're trying to support that effort through the Block Club too. But for Dream itself, things will probably be a little bit low-key. Personally, I don't know. We're looking forward to a month at home. Ramadan actually is wonderful, and also hard in the fact that we're being pulled a million different places all month long, and you don't want to turn down invitations, and you want to be, you want to benefit from everything that's being offered. So, I'm looking forward actually to a little bit of a slower Ramadan with the boys, with our sons and with my wife, and we're trying to get ready for it like everyone else.
Yeah, no, I mean, for us, Ramadan is like one of the busiest times, and
Yeah, you know.
I barely, get any time to myself, and we're running around. For me, it's a lot of documenting,
Hmm.
and so I'm trying to get to as many communities as I can and attend a lot of events. So, yeah, it's going to be very different this year. So,
Yeah,
very quiet. So,
yeah,
yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Keep up the
yeah.
good work. And I know that you guys are making some tough adjustments, and we're definitely thinking about you guys. I really appreciate all that you do.
No, we
And
appreciate you. I'll close by mentioning one thing we're sad about. It
yeah,
kind of slipped my mind. We actually were on schedule to pilot the artist residency at the Indus Detroit House this year, the
that's
same
right.
house
Yeah,
where Halal Metropolis kicked off their exhibits last summer, kicked off their exhibit. And so we were really excited about that. We've actually got a sister living there now who's a photographer. We'll probably still find some sort of way, God willing, to do some sort of public engagement, but that's one of the things that will suffer a little bit, unfortunately, because of social distancing.
yeah.
But yeah, but right back at you. We're grateful for everything that y'all do, and appreciate the chance to be welcomed into this series.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, take
Yeah,
care. Talk to you
take
soon.
care.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thanks a lot.